All right, good evening. I think I've got everything set up. It's taken me 8 weeks or 7 weeks, 8 weeks, however we want to call it. It's taken me this long to figure out how to really get a screen set up for these type of classes in this format. So, and here I'm not even. There we go. It's taken me this long, but I think I finally got it so I can monitor questions effectively. I know some people like to put in questions throughout the class. Please feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question or to type it in like we've done in the past. So um, I'm good with either, but I finally got it set up here after 2 months of doing this. So, like I said last week, it looks like we're going to go this week into the English translations. To be honest with you, we'll get what doesn't seem like very far into history with English translations, but we'll get up until 1611 tonight. We'll stop just before the King James version, and then next week we'll go King James version to the modern translations. To be completely honest, as I was thinking about this, I was kind of stressing about having to put all this information in these last 2 weeks, and even doing it this way, this week and next. It's really cramming a lot of information into 2 weeks when it comes to these English translations. If it were up to me, I would love to spend another 4 weeks talking about each translation. So whenever you come across them, you'll be able to really know what you're looking at, know where it came from, how it was put together, and make a decision about what you use better. But I just simply we don't have time, and trying to do an 8 week course, we don't have time to do that. I think the information we've had thus far and the history of the English Bible that we'll see tonight is vitally important to what you can learn moving forward. And we'll hit the highlights with modern translations next week, and really focus on the main ones that are important for us today. So, as I said in the beginning, we're cramming. This is like trying to cram a normal college semester into 8 weeks, and I'll get more efficient as we go forward and trying to take out what uh, what I can and leave the most important stuff in an 8 week course for people. But like I said, this is a beta run, kind of a test run for doing these type of classes. Um, I hope it's been beneficial for everybody here that participates and has participated. Um, but you're trying to think, this class would normally be a 15-week class, 3 hours a week instead of two. So, I'm trying to put 45 hours worth of material and trying to cut what I can and condense what I can and put it into 16 hours. So 45 hours into 16 hours, it's a lot. I think that all of the information that we could have gone over would have been worth 45 hours, but not everybody has that type of time and to be able to set aside every week. So the goal is 8 week classes moving forward. Like I said, I'll get better at cutting them down and making sure we stay in 8 weeks. This one will be 9 weeks, but y'all get an extra week out of me. So just to recap where we're at, last week we talked about the first printed versions of the Greek New Testament. Really, we built up, we didn't talk about any of the versions, but we built up to what really produced the perfect atmosphere for these Greek versions to come about. And why are these so important? We didn't really hit on this last week, but I wanted to establish why these are so important. Because up until this point, we're dealing with the Latin Vulgate, which was a very good, we're talking about Jerome's Latin Vulgate. It's very good translation into Latin for that time. It was the language that was being used. It was very, very important for getting the word, solidified in history and compiling what we kind of consider a good canon of scripture moving forward. So the Latin Vulgate was very good. I think that a lot of times it gets such a bad rap. I'll tell you, the first time that I studied or I took this course at the master's level. I took a history of the Bible course at the master's level, and my professor was so excited to talk about Jerome and the Latin Vulgate. And idea of where we were going was not very good. I said, wait a minute, hang on. We're talking about the Latin Vulgate here that the church used against its people for thousands of years, but we can't think of the Latin Vulgate in the context of how it was used, but the importance of why it was put together and what it did for the translation of the Bible moving forward. So it wasn't Jerome's fault that people later would use it to lord over the people of the church in a bad way. He did a great work. I mean, Jerome was a phenomenal scholar, and worked tirelessly to get it to where, to preserve the word for his time. So, um, but we move up into the 15th century, or we kind of have this perfect scenario where the printing press has been rediscovered. We talked about how it was originally in China, and it gets rediscovered by Johann Gutenberg, and some of your people, TK, Tommy Kuntz in the class here, uh, has discovered his German roots in years previous. He takes a trip about once a year to Germany to visit his family. So, um, but Johann Gutenberg, he rediscovers this print, and is famous for having printed a 2-volume copy of Jerome's Latin Vulgate. 46,000 wood blocks he used to set the type. This is all information we went over last week, but this discovery of the Gutenberg, in conjunction with the fall of Constantinople, which forced Greek scholars to flee Constantinople and flee west, and they fled with all of their ancient manuscripts in 1453. And then you had this burst of knowledge and information going on in England at the time, known as the Renaissance, art and history and culture. But specific for us, there was a huge interest in Greek history and Greek culture and Greek language. And all of this happens at the same time. And then you have Martin Luther's 95 Theses. And we know Martin Luther is the father of the Reformation. He put these 95 Theses on the church door, and to um, protest what the Catholic Church had going on. Martin Luther himself was not trying to start a new movement of new denominations or anything like that. He wanted to reform the church. His main contention was there in the middle of the 95 Theses. I forgot which number it was, but his main contention was over indulgences that the church at that time had. The Catholic Church at that time had started selling indulgences. You could buy sins that would be forgiven before you committed them, and this money was being used to do all sorts of things. And so his main number one rejection of the church setting at that time was over these indulgences. And he said, that all believers, anyone that would come to repentance, has the freedom to repent uh, between themselves and God without an intermediary or a purchase of any type of indulgence. Um, so that's kind of the situation we have, and all of this coming together is going to push this new excitement for the Greek manuscripts. To be completely honest, we'll talk about it in just a minute, but to be completely honest, um, many of the clergymen of the church at this time had forgotten that the New Testament scriptures, anyway, had even been written in Greek. We're going to come to a situation where a translation from Greek into English gets criticized because um, it didn't use the Latin Vulgate, and they criticize it because they assumed that the Latin was the original language of the New Testament. They didn't have internet and all these things; they didn't have all these tools. But when the Latin was so ingrained in the history of the church, that's how far it had come. That most of the clergy at the time actually thought that the New Testament was written itself in Latin. So this is where we left off last week. So we're going straight into Greek versions. And the first one we're going to come across is the Complutensian polyglot. From this point forward, I'm going to refer to it as the polyglot. That's what most people do. They refer to this just simply as the polyglot. When we say polyglot, this is the one we're thinking of. This word polyglot just means multiple languages. It's not just when dealing with the Bible, but anything that you would deal with multiple languages side by side. That's what it was. So this was produced between 1514 and 1522. So in 1502, Cardinal Ximenes, and he has a longer name. I didn't put it all, but you can just reference Cardinal Ximenes of Toledo, Spain. He's known for this, widely known. You know, big Wikipedia page on him and stuff like that. So in 1502, he has the idea to produce and to ask someone to uh, produce this polyglot in honor of the birth of a new son, the new heir to the throne of Rome, and Charles V. And Charles V will come up later, but this was a celebration of his birth. This dedication of this Bible and everything. Now he would work tirelessly to collect manuscripts at all cost, and it wasn't so easy as he thought it would be. But he's going to go and round up every Greek manuscript that he could find. He's going to hire all kinds of people to go out and do this and to find as many manuscripts as he can. This is a quote from Frederick Scrivener, a scholar. He says, the whole outlay of Cardinal Ximenes on the polyglot is stated to have exceeded 50,000 ducats, or about 23,000 pounds. That's, I mean, even in today's money, 23,000 pounds, that's like, I don't know, $30,000 or so. That's just a guesstimate off the top of my head. But he spends about 30 grand just to try to find some manuscripts, paying people to go out and look for them. But this was about, as he said, this was about, a quarter of his yearly income. So it was a lot of money, but he was, you know, being the cardinal there, and what his occupation was, he made a lot of money as it was. So he's going to collect all of these Greek manuscripts. And this is very important for us. Works like this are what helped, preserve. This is in the 1500s, right? Way later than the first, second century when these manuscripts are being written. But stuff like this that we're seeing being done is what helps preserve manuscripts for our day today as well. Him spending all this money to bring this together in honor of Charles V really helped to maintain a lot of these manuscripts. So he's gonna put this together. He's gonna, he didn't put it together himself, but he's gonna commission this polyglot, and it's going to take place in Alcala, Spain. In Latin, that city Alcala, they refer to it as Complutum, which is where the Complutensian, the namesake of this polyglot, comes from. It's basically the polyglot from that region. So that's where that name comes from. So they're going to have the Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin in parallel columns. Now they're going to do this through the whole Bible here, and obviously where there's all kinds of stuff being pulled in to make this happen. But we would call this a parallel Bible for us today. We can buy those with different translations or different versions, different versions today, and that's essentially what he's doing with the languages here. He's putting them in parallel columns. So the New Testament was completed in January 10th of 1514, and the Old Testament 3.5 years later. But the entire Bible was not put together until 1522. And that was after, Cardinal Ximenes died in 1517. So he got to see the completion of his work, but not the completion of his work printed together. There were about 600 copies that were made of this polyglot. Man, I would love to just hold one, but there were about 600 copies of this polyglot made, and this is superior. We haven't even talked about this yet. It's the next one coming up, but it's superior to the Erasmus Greek New Testament. Its work in Greek was really good, very, very good compared to Erasmus. But as we'll see with Erasmus, it gets much more fame and much more popularity, even though it wasn't as good. This one just doesn't get the popularity that Erasmus does. So it's here placed first because the the starting of the work started first. So 1514, the work here starts. Now it's printing and its completion in entirety is not done until 1522, which comes after the Erasmus Greek, but it started beforehand. So I kind of placed it here in the beginning with Erasmus coming next. So um, when we talk about the Greek New Testament of Erasmus, very important figure. And there's, as we get into later versions and stuff like that, we'll talk about who is using what Greek manuscripts and stuff like that. And Erasmus is his Greek his Greek New Testament is going to be used quite a bit, but a lot of people don't like that because it honestly, it just wasn't a very good work. It was done in haste, and we'll see that here. But he's very important in history because of the use of his New Testament being used from this point forward when it comes to English translation. So he was born in 15, or he was not born in 1516. So this work started in 1516, or the work was completed. Excuse me, completed in 1516. But he was. I should have had that date up by the Greek New Testament of Erasmus instead of on the first bullet there. But that's his name, Erasmus of Rotterdam. He was credited as having the first Greek New Testament, but like we said, I would place the polyglot before Erasmus, even though it was completed afterwards. The work had begun. But he was born in 1466 as an illegitimate son to a priest, and he was going to be orphaned very young. Now, a lot of times when you're orphaned back then, you may find yourself in religious work as a child, and even into adulthood, you would be kind of taken in by the church. The orphanages are being run by churches and stuff like that. So as a child, he would find himself working within the church. And then, as with many of the other orphans, they would go on into church work and ministry as they grew up based on their upbringing. So this is kind of what happens to him. He kind of starts off very young working into his religious work. In 1492, he's going to go to a monastery, and he will leave there and go to this college in Paris and then to Cambridge. And he's going to meet these two people, Colette and Thomas More. Now, these two, just a couple of slides back, we talked about them last week, and they were a couple of slides back when we're talking about this boom of information. These two are very interested in the Greek culture and history. They're part of this Renaissance era, especially when it comes to the interest in Greek in England. So originally Erasmus is interested in the Latin Vulgate, and he does work on his own Latin translation and printing his own version of the Vulgate. But this printer, his name was Froben. He's gonna meet up with him in England, and Froben was interested in a Greek New Testament. He's kind of in this whole realm of the Renaissance and interested in resurrecting the Greek text and going back to the original. So he's gonna approach Erasmus and try to offer him the opportunity to work on a Greek New Testament. And Froben, he's just a printer, so he needs to find a scholar and they can do the translational work, or they can do the not translational work, but they can do the compilation work with manuscripts. And he's gonna ask him to do that. Now, he's not really that interested in it, to be completely honest. Erasmus isn't. He's more focused on this work in the Latin Vulgate, but he says he'll take, he takes on the task here. And Froben is he's very much understands that what's going on with Cardinal Ximenes, and you kind of have this race against time here to kind of beat him to the printing presses. But Erasmus has this idea, and this kind of carries forward with all of his work, that theology is the handmaiden of grammar. And what he means by that is, to completely understand the Bible, you must be able to bring it back to its roots, which was the Greek. And this is what kind of propelled him to work on this work here. Theology is the handmaiden of grammar. We can't truly understand what the Bible says and truly understand where we stand theologically without understanding the biblical languages, the languages in which the Bible was written: Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic. So he's going to go after being commissioned here in 1515. He goes to Basel, Switzerland, and this is where he's going to do his work here. Now, like I said, they're going to be rushed to production here. They're trying to fight this race against time with Cardinal Ximenes. The problem that Erasmus runs into is he doesn't have good manuscripts to work with. Now, think back to what Cardinal Ximenes does. He spends all this money to hoard all these Greek manuscripts. So when Erasmus gets ready to do his work, and remember, he's getting started after Cardinal Ximenes does, he doesn't have good manuscripts to work with. He's got some bad manuscripts to work with, and they rush to production on this thing, and it's going to be 10 months only that he puts work into his Greek New Testament, the Greek New Testament of Erasmus. So along with this manuscript are really how it comes out. This Greek New Testament comes out from Erasmus as a diglot. We said a while ago that a polyglot would be multiple languages. You would kind of have a diglot, triglot, and a polyglot would be anything 4 or more. So he's going to come out with this diglot. That's what his Greek New Testament is. It's the Greek next to the Latin Vulgate. For obvious reasons at that time, the Latin was still huge. So for them to be able to look and see and work with this Greek text that many were still not very familiar with, he's going to place it right next to the Latin Vulgate. So, so when I say he has bad manuscripts, he only has 6 manuscripts to work with. He doesn't have a lot that he's working with. And when it comes to these 6 manuscripts, he has one manuscript. It was, I should have put the name of that manuscript down here. It was like manuscript 1 or something. I mean, I can't remember what they named it. But when it comes to this manuscript, which is the best and oldest manuscript that he had to work with, he actually uses it a least amount of time. And I haven't done a whole lot of detailed study into Erasmus to see if there's some notes on why this was. But this really plays a part into, later understanding of the Greek Erasmus, Greek New Testament, and how it's going to be used in the future. So he uses this best and oldest manuscript that he has. He uses it the least amount of time. So when asked about his Greek New Testament, he said it was precipitated rather than edited. And that's really saying, that he basically compiled. This is kind of pointing to his compiling this in a rush, in a hurry. So he says it's precipitated rather than edited. One example we have of some of the rushed work that happened, probably the most famous criticism of his is when it comes to the book of Revelation. The last page was missing. So he borrowed a manuscript, a Greek manuscript from a friend of his. But the problem with this one manuscript, that this was his only manuscript he had that contained Revelation, the book of Revelation. And the problem was the last page was missing. So it's like, it's not very much on the last page, maybe half a chapter. I can't remember. I should have some of those details in here. But again, we're trying to hit the highlights. We could put a lot more in here, but the problem was the last page was missing. And what does he do? He doesn't seek out, because of his rush to printing, he doesn't seek out another manuscript that might have this last page of Revelation on it. He goes back to the Latin Vulgate, and then he translates from Latin to Greek. You come up with all kinds of issues. If you've ever studied any kind of language and translation, this is how we understand the New Testament, for example, and what text they're using when they're writing the New Testament, what text of the Old Testament they're using. We kind of talked about this a little bit. I think I glossed over it a bit, gave some numbers, but when it comes to the New Testament, their quotations of the Old Testament help us see what they're using. And by and large, they're using, to a great majority, the New Testament writers are quoting from the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. And we see this through that. But when you start translating back, if they took that Greek translation of the Old Testament and you try to translate back into Hebrew from the Greek, you're not going to end up with the same product as the original Hebrew language. So that's what's going on here. He's trying to get back to the original Greek manuscripts and compile this Greek New Testament from the original manuscripts. But with this last portion of Revelation, he translates back into Greek from the Latin Vulgate. This will get corrected later, but this is just one example of how this rush to printing caused some issues within his text. So he also adds words randomly that were not found in the Greek. And again, there's different reasons for every one. This is kind of one of the most well-known ones, where he adds, "What shall I do, Lord?" to Acts 9:6. This is actually a phrase that's going to be later on in Acts, is actually in the Greek New Testament, but it's not there in Acts 9:6. So there's mixed reviews when it comes to this. There's some people, the followers of Erasmus at the time, of course, they really appreciate it. Oxford and Cambridge refused to allow their students to read it. They thought that it was a rebellion to the church at the time. Why? Again, the scholars at Oxford and Cambridge most definitely probably knew that the Greek was the original language, but they saw no need to go back to it. Latin was so ingrained, and so there's this idea to not go back to the Greek. That the Latin was just fine. In the University of Louvain, which is in Belgium, they're good with it. There's a scholar named De Stunica. He's going to have issues with it surrounding 1 John 5:7-8. This is referred to as the Comma Johanneum or Johanneum. The issue here is that Erasmus says that in all of his text, all of the Greek manuscripts that he could find, this small portion in 1 John 5 was not to be found in any Greek manuscript. Well, go back up to the first bullet. He's using six manuscripts. So there's like a heated debate that happens around this issue right here with Comma Johanneum. Later on in 1522, he's going to release a third edition of his Greek New Testament. Now he's going to include, he's going to concede and include, because if you do further study, you find this portion of text in many other manuscripts. So he's going to conclude later to us. I mean, we know that it's in many other manuscripts. To him in his time, he says something along the lines of, if anyone can produce a single Greek manuscript that would contain these verses, then I would edit my text and include it in my Greek New Testament. Well, lo and behold, somebody produces a Greek New Testament manuscript that has this portion. He's going to include it in his third edition in 1522, but he's going to include it with a footnote that basically says, I included it based on a manuscript that was produced, but I pretty much, and I'm paraphrasing here, I pretty much think somebody fabricated this just to argue with me on this verse. So he includes it, but not without his own comments. So there's 5 editions that are given of this. Again, it's going to be used, widely moving forward. It's going to be used a good bit. Most notably here for the near future, Martin Luther is going to use the second edition of his Greek New Testament for his German translation, which is very influential at the time. When Martin Luther does his German translation, that is influencing the world quite a bit. So Erasmus, his Greek New Testament is going to be excuse me, very influential, not just in the German world, but Martin Luther doing that translation and using Erasmus here influences other things as well, and we'll get into that. But Tyndale, most people say that he probably used his third edition to render his translation, and the fourth edition he's going to include the Greek, the Latin Vulgate, and his own Latin translation. Remember, Erasmus was originally interested in the Latin and taking the Latin Vulgate and updating that. So he actually does that later on in his fourth edition. He has these. So he himself used the polyglot before him in his later editions to make some editing. So while we understand that the polyglot was better than his translation, the first one anyway, he actually uses that to update his works in later editions. So you kind of see some self-correction there, but at the same time, it's kind of sloppy work going into it because they just were trying to race against time, and they threw this thing together. And we're talking about the Word of God here. We're talking about trying to preserve and go back to the original language. It kind of wasn't handled as well as it should be. But he receives his criticism, and it goes from there. So after this, we're going to have Robert Estienne. He's a Parisian printer. Now, everybody, if you look him up, I mean, obviously you can look up this name and find it, but most people understand him as Stephanus, which is like, I don't know if that's like the Romanized name, or but he has this other name that's given to him, Stephanus. So he's going to work from 1503, or he lived from 1503 to 1559. He's going to have, as it says here, the 4 editions of the Greek New Testament. The first 3 were written for the French government. The French government commissioned his work, and these 3 editions that he does for them are known for their beauty. They're known for being very stylized editions of the Greek New Testament. Obviously, you get commissioned. I mean, that would be like anybody getting commissioned today to, do some work for the United States when it comes to something like this. I mean, you would do the best you could. So on his first and second editions, he relied on the polyglot and Erasmus together to kind of put these things together. He's going to become more proficient in his later versions, and he's doing his own work here. He's now bringing together a lot more manuscripts, a lot more information, and he's going to be doing his own work and relying less on them after that. What's important here is the third and fourth editions. You've got the third edition includes an apparatus, and we kind of talk about, go back to thinking about the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, the Greek Bible, when we talked about its use modernly as we went forward in those 2 languages, the original text. We come to the apparatus being used by modern translators, where it has all those footnotes within it to say, whether there were differences between that text and other texts like the Septuagint. And so he's including this, which is very, very monumental at his time. He's including this in his third Greek translation. And then the fourth one, most notably, so this is kind of what he's known for in the history of the Bible, is, you look up Stephanus and you're going to find that he created the modern verse division. So the divisions of chapters and verses that we have in our English Bibles are largely identical to what he came up with here in his 4th edition. So after that, we're going to have Theodore de Beza. Beza's a great scholar at his time. Again, I'm just including some very quick notes on some of these. You could go into and study these nth degree. I mean, your textbook goes into it as well. I forget, we have a book that we're reading, so you should be done with that book now. Side note, I'm interested on some comments in the group on what you thought of the last chapter after having read it first and then going back through the entire book. So if you feel led to leave those comments in that Facebook group, I'm interested to read it. So, but he succeeded John Calvin as head of the Reformed Protestantism. John Calvin kind of leads the Reformation movement, and Beza is going to take over. They're both Calvin and Beza, both based out of Geneva. Though you see, like Beza's born and studies in France. His family wanted him to be ordained, and when I say ordained, wanted him to be ordained in the Catholic Church. He doesn't want that. He's going to go to Geneva at the age of 29. And from there, he's going to publish at least 9 Greek New Testament editions. Some of those are simple corrections to his own editions, but Beza does great work when it comes to the Greek New Testament, and great work in leading this Reformation as well. So with that, we'll get into English version. So the question, this first bullet, when it comes to English versions, the question is, at least for me, why so long? Why did it take so long for there to be an English translation? Now, the quick knee-jerk response to that is kind of what I talked about earlier. The quick knee-jerk response is, well, the church just held it against them, and they had no, we think of Tyndale, being burned at the stake, and we think of all of these people and the dangers that went through. That definitely played a role into it, but there's a little more to it than that. Latin was the language for so long. I mean, you're talking about Latin being the language for 1,000 years, and people were illiterate at that time. Only and it actually got worse. Illiteracy got worse as you went through time there for a little while. You come to this portion of time, this era where even the kings were quite illiterate, and so you had this huge, massive illiteracy going on, and Latin just happened to be the language that was passed down. What Jerome did ends up being something that gets solidified into the history of the church. But there was also a lack of training in languages. So you had the clergy. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier. You have the clergy that's so ingrained in this in Latin that they don't even have the knowledge that the New Testament was written in Greek. But more so, and that kind of goes to the first bullet there, but more so, you have a complete lack of training in languages altogether when it comes to clergy. That they couldn't do a Latin translation into English if they wanted to. Much of the clergy wasn't even that great at Latin. A lot of the clergy at the time would be assigned Latin portions of the text that they would almost, really memorize for, reading in the church setting. But most of them weren't even that good. They couldn't read Latin fluently. They were memorizing portions or learning portions of scripture in Latin, but they couldn't translate it into, they couldn't read the entire Bible in Latin, much less translate it into any kind of English. So they just lacked the simple ability to do so. And then, of course, your dangers come in, like with William Tyndale and Matthew Rogers, these people that lost their lives for the sake of translation. Many people, too, more than this. A lot of people we don't even have names for, like especially after William Tyndale, who people just being burned at the stake in mass that we don't even have the names for. But those are the 3 main reasons why it took so long to get an English translation. And it's kind of in that order as well, chronologically. You didn't have this huge danger early on, but you just had a lack of literacy and a lack of knowledge and a lack of training. And the danger comes later on after that happens. So, but when we go to England, Britain's captured by the Romans in the 2nd century. That says BCE. That definitely needs to be changed. 2nd century of CE, I think. I don't know. It might be BCE. Maybe I put that for a reason. But what you have here when the Romans capture them, and then you have, whether you're talking about second BCE or CE, um, what you have is when the gospel starts to spread, it's spreading specifically through the Roman Empire, so it finds its way to Britain, and not only just the gospel message. You find this fleeing of Christians from areas of um, tribulation, not tribulation, but they're trying to squelch and crush Christian society, so that they're fleeing. My mind went blank for the word I'm looking for, but they're fleeing into the outer regions of Europe and stuff like that. So you find a lot of believers settling in Britain at the time. What I didn't know when I first started studying this was how fast manuscripts found themselves. You think about Israel, right? Israel, where the gospel messages started, and you think about England and Ireland, where that's at, um, and you think about how fast it spread. I mean, we find very old manuscripts in Britain very early. So you kind of have this gospel being spread all the way up there at a very early time. So we have the first kind of Bible into English. Some, if we can call it English, we're talking about Anglo-Saxon here. This is kind of predating the what we know as English, but Caedmon or Cadmon here in the 7th century. He's a cow herder and he's working for this woman, and he has, this. I mean, he's just simply that, a cow herder. He's just a hardworking man, and he hated singing. So we think about um, like traditional ideas of old England, and I don't know. I think about, like, aside from Shakespeare, which is way after this, I think about like drinking beer and singing songs or something along that. That's essentially what Caedmon and his buddies. That's essentially what they're doing. They're getting together and they're singing songs. So the traditional story of what was going on here with him is that they're having these nights of singing and dancing, and everybody sang, and he knew that they would call on him to sing, and he thought, I'm the worst singer there is. There's no way. So he would go off and hide in the stables, uh, or whatever you want to call them, stables. I don't know what they're called at the time, where the animals were kept. He'd go hide up in the hay and hide from these singers. He didn't want to sing. And so one night he has a dream, and he relays this dream. He says, I have this dream, and in this dream, a man comes to me and says, I want you to write some songs, and I want you to start with this song. Or he didn't say songs. He said, I want you to write a song. And Kamon says that this man gives him the song word for word and gives him the rhythm to sing it. And when he wakes up, the dream was so vivid that he immediately knows the song, every single word, and he starts sharing it. Now, the song was uh, a song that's declaring the greatness and the glory of God. It's a song about creation and how God's the creator of the universe. Now, Caedmon says, not only do I hate songs, I have no real knowledge of the Bible, and this is information that was given to me in a dream in one night, and I immediately knew it. So he was kind of seen as God had worked a miracle through him and had given him this song. Uh, and that's not the Bible into English just yet. That's a song given to him in a dream that declares the glory of God. But he's going to be brought to a school where there now he's going to start making English songs out of uh, the scriptures there. So he turns scriptures into songs here, and this really helps. I mean, when we talk about the passing of information, right? Remember, the Bible is nothing but a big story, and God calls us to be storytellers. He's doing it in such a way here that is somewhat modern, but also ancient. I mean, this is how the majority of people, even in our day and age, children learn the earliest information through songs. My 2-year-old today asked me to sing the ABCs about 50 times. So he's going to change these Bible stories into songs. Aldhelm is the first bishop of Sherborne and Dorset. I did not put a date on him, but he's a couple hundred years later. I think a couple hundred years later. But he takes the Psalter, which is the Psalms, that's um, from the Latin Vulgate, and he translates not all of it. He's not taking the entire Psalms that we have today and translating, but he's doing a good bit of work from the Psalms in Anglo-Saxon. Again, this is for the sake of song. This is for the sake of being able to sing these things. So you kind of see this early on, and we're talking Anglo-Saxon here. This is not anything that we would be able. Why well, wasn't a couple hundred years, because I went in order here. So he's sometime in between 678 and 736. Um, but this is before anything we would be able to comprehend as English. So, but now we get to Bede or Beatty. And 736, really, there's multiple dates for what he does on his work, but 736 is really kind of his mark of portions of the Bible in English. But he's a monk of Jarrow. He's really known as the father of English history and the early English church. His work is relied upon heavily when it comes to English history. You're talking about a historian in 736 relaying the history of England. That's really the oldest work we have. Now, he was known for his meticulous note taking and his expansive library. I always take this with a little bit of a grain of salt, because people think, sometimes you would think like the farther we go back in history, the better information they have. Um, I have my own bone to pick with Beatty on a couple of topics. That's not for our study of here tonight, but we have to kind of take that with a grain of salt too when people are trying to put together history from this time and era. When we talk about the expansive library of Beatty, he had like 100 and like I don't know, I can't remember the exact number. He had like 150 books in his library. Think about that in comparison to our libraries today, and the vast amount of information that we've been able to compile, catalog, and put into electronic versions of information on the internet and stuff like that. So he does give us tons of history, but it's also sometimes it's limited by his limited resources there. So but he's going to translate portions of English. Now, his work in history is, I think, the famous date is 731 is when he compiles like his most of his main works on the history of England and the English Church. That's 731, and then 736 he's doing some translational work. And again, it's just portions of the Bible. I'm pretty sure excuse me, I'm pretty sure the Psalms are part of the portions he's doing here, but he's just taking portions of English. Now, he was a very uh, devoted man to God, and that's kind of seen through this uh, portion, the last bullet there that says he was known. It was said that he was dictating the book of John into English with his dying breath. He did a lot of work, not just with himself, but he did a lot of work to help the people around him either make English translations themselves. He was, especially later in life, he had become really a teacher and was always trying to find anybody they could around him to help when it came to not just English translations, but when it came to anything. He was just a teacher of teachers at his time. So after him, we have Alfred the Great. There's a couple of small little things in between Beatty and Alfred the Great, but what's really going on there is just more of the little portions here and there of Scripture. I'm again given the highlights here. You see a lot of, at this time, people doing kind of what Caedmon here was doing back then, of just taking parts of Scripture and making English jingles out of them and stuff like that. Very important to the transmission of the gospel at that time, because again, illiteracy was so high. They didn't have the word of God in their own language. So anything they could to help people remember these stories and to remember the gospel message was very, very important. So But there was some of that in between Beatty and Alfred, but just not as noteworthy as these. So Alfred the Great was king of Wessex. This is the period I was talking about where many of the kings at this time were just illiterate. They didn't know how to read and write. But he was very literate, not just in the English language, but in other languages. He starts to make a lot of reforms in England. He kind of looks back over history and says, some things need to change here. So he starts making some reforms, and he's relying heavily on the Word of God to make these reforms at that time. So he's going to take the Psalms again. He's taking these songs and of Psalms and putting them into English. What I found most notable was that as he was writing what we would call like his law code or whatever, he's kind of laying out his edicts and how through this kind of Reformation period of the legal standpoint of his region, he's kind of making these new law codes and saying this is how we're going to do things moving forward. But as he writes up his law codes, he actually introduces it with the Ten Commandments in English. So he translates this is more translational work here. He translates the Ten Commandments into English, and then he includes portions of Exodus and portions of Acts. Exodus was obviously the Ten Commandments, but I can't remember the other portions that he used out of Exodus. But Acts specifically was Acts 15 verses, I think 22 through like 29, right there after the Council of Jerusalem comes up with the things that new believers should stop doing right now. It's that portion that immediately follows. He includes that as well. So he includes all these as kind of a basis and a kind of calling back to this biblical morality and moving forward and trying to reform England at the time. So really cool work right there. I mean, he's not translating the entire Bible, but he's doing things that are, one could argue, even more important in trying to instill biblical essentials um, into the communities there and using his position. As we go into the Middle Ages, again, you have little works here and there throughout the Middle Ages, but you don't see a whole lot between him and we're going to get to the Wycliffe Bible after that. But you don't see a whole lot of stuff going on between Alfred the Great and the Wycliffe Bible, other than just small little bits of translation here and there. Nothing as huge as what we've just are as noteworthy as the things we've included here. So, um, 7:56. We'll take a break, and we'll come back at 10 after. We'll come back at 8:10 and continue on. So get you something to eat, something to drink, and we'll be All right. We should be back here. Let me get my screen back like it was. All right. So we're going from Alfred the Great. We touched on the Middle Ages here just a little bit. Oh, let me get this going. And we touched on glitchy. Y'all don't make fun of me. Uh, something was glitching there on the screen. Um, we touched on the Middle Ages just briefly on how some of the work that's being done in between the 10th century here and the 14th century is really just minuscule. It's not much at all to be noteworthy for our class here. So from there we'll go straight into the Wycliffe Bible. The Wycliffe Bible was completed in the two portions, and this is kind of how you'll see the works being done at least this time period, because it's such a great task to translate the Bible at this time that it's taken them time. They're doing what New Testament believers in Jesus, they find the New Testament to be most important, so they're completing it first. Um, there's other versions of the Old Testament out there, but they see their work to start with the New Testament and then go back. You see this kind of with every English translation here. But the New Testament is completed in 1380, Old Testament 1382. Wycliffe himself, John Wycliffe, he lived from 1329 to 1384. He was born in Yorkshire. I pretend to know when I read these. I'm like, oh yeah, I've heard of Yorkshire. No, it just sounds very English to me. So I, I hear these names of these towns and I include them in these slides, and I'm like, I don't really know anything about England. It sounds very British, and so of course I think Yorkshire sounds familiar. But he's going to go to Balliol College in Oxford. This is early on. We think in the realm of universities, this is pretty early. He's going to then go from there after he graduates. He's going to be a teaching fellow at Merton College in 1356. He's teaching there, but he will get his master's from Balliol College in 1361, and he's going to resign from teaching at uh, Merton College shortly afterwards. He's going to remain a lecturer at Oxford University, but his main focus and what his main focus is really working in the church. He sees that his teaching and his education is best suited right there on the ground level. So he's going to work at a couple of main churches there locally, but still be a lecturer at Oxford University. So he's well known for his speaking. Now he's going to continue to lecture there, and his classrooms were flooded with students. Everyone wanted to come and hear John Wycliffe speak. He was just very good, not just at debate, but he was very good just in lectures about the Bible, and everyone. He just had that personality, that ability to speak. I would say charismatic, though I don't think anybody. Uh, I don't know. I've never read that being attributed, but anyone that draws in a crowd is charismatic in some sense. So um, over time, as he's teaching, he's going to have a growing concern over the church. Even at his time, he recognized that even the King of England had to bow to the church, the Roman Catholic Church. So his growing concern for the church and these two main doctrines here are his two main contentions with the church is intermediary communication. What that means is um, that you had to go in between someone to communicate to God. He says there's nothing biblical about having to communicate with God through someone else. Which not getting into theology too much, if you well, no, we're not gonna even we won't even go there. His other contention was transubstantiation. That's the idea that when you partook of communion, bread and wine, that you are literally, that's just in a nutshell, very simplistic, that you're literally eating the literal flesh and blood of Jesus. The topic is much more convoluted than that. But those were the two things that he was against. His two main contentions with the church were that those two doctrines, plus the fact that they had so much control over the church and control over England itself. So a lot of his speaking engagements that he's doing now, he's lecturing at Oxford, but he's also now speaking outside of Oxford, and a lot of his speaking is in, to contest these ideas of the church. He's speaking out against the church very much. The Pope attempted to ban him from all ministry. What I mean by that, they tried to get Oxford University and the two churches that he worked at to kick him out, basically. Don't give him a platform to speak. However, at the time, he was friends with John of Gaunt, which was Duke of Lancaster, and he kind of protected him. And the Oxford administration really enjoyed him. You think about a university, especially at that time, you have people flooding to the school there to really want to come and listen to his lectures. You have the same type of thing going on today. In universities today, universities gain their clout based on the faculty and the staff that teaches there. But of course, they don't want to kick him out. He's good for business, really. That's a strange way to say it. Even back then, it wasn't really business for them, but they supported him, and more importantly, the common people of his community supported him. So he's not going to be pushed out of ministry very quickly or very easily. However, he is eventually let go from Oxford. The pressure from the Catholic Church there was just too much to overcome, and he is going to eventually be pushed out. But he's going to keep talking and keep spreading his ideas of this biblical Christianity, this return, well, this idea that the people of the church had to return to biblical Christianity, not the Christianity that had been created at that time. His followers would go out and share his ideologies. They would be known as the Lollards. If you've studied any type of history here, you might have heard that term, but the definition of that is the lowered people, these lowly people that are, that's not a good term, but they were referred to as the Lollards, the people that followed John Wycliffe at the time. So his whole idea here is kind of summed up in what he had to say here when he says, "It helpeth Christian men to study the gospel in that tongue in which they know best Christ's sentence." So this is kind of going to push him forward. This is kind of his statement about how he's going to try to get the Bible into English. He sees that these people that had no idea that the church was using things, the church at that time, their use of Latin and their reasons for it were twofold. One, the people could not be trusted to handle the scripture correctly. And two, it would take away the biblical hierarchy of leadership in the church. Both of these would be proven wrong later, right? The church still has, I hate to use the word hierarchy, but God's leadership is still established in the church. God's Bible was intended to be carried out, understood, and lived in the midst of a community where leaders guided believers into understanding and righteous living. That doesn't end with the translation of the Bible into English or any other tongue, right? That never ends, because the Bible, that's a biblical principle that in their own tongue would actually be solidified. So they're trying to keep people from translating this Bible into English at this time, because it would take away their power. But I think if we're honest, and they were honest, it wouldn't take away their power as no, I'll say it wouldn't take away their leadership, their biblical leadership, their claim to biblical leadership. It would take away their power. And what I mean by that is the people would understand the things that they were doing that wasn't wrong, which leads into why the other reason was actually false in itself, because their second reason, I said it first, but their second reason for it was that they believed that the people couldn't rightfully handle the Bible themselves. If we gave this Bible to all the people in their own tongue, they're going to read it themselves and they're going to misuse it. Well, that's exactly what had happened anyway, right? The people who kept this and hoarded this word misused it and applied different doctrines that were not biblical at all to begin with, indulgences and stuff like this. The things that Martin Luther was against and tacked his 95 Theses out there, those very things were the things that the church themselves had taken the Bible and misused. So one would claim to be false later on when the people get this in their language. They don't go away from biblical leadership, and two, they themselves had already done what they would think that the others would do. Anyway, that's kind of a little side thing here, but he's going to be credited with the first full Bible in English. That's not exactly accurate. He doesn't get the entire Old Testament, but he's the first one that gets both Old Testament and New Testament and tries to compile it together. But there's a question of whether it was him or his students. So he gets this idea to compile the English Bible, and he had all these followers, the Lollards, and lots of people around him. So some say, well, he didn't actually do the translation. He actually just oversaw the translation. His students should get credit. It matters not, right? It doesn't matter whether he did the translation himself or oversaw the translation with the work of his followers. He is responsible for that translation. So that kind of doesn't really matter. He's going to be spoken against. People are, they don't really know what to do with him. John Wycliffe is so popular amongst the common people, and he's also popular amongst many of the scholarship and the university people. He's popular amongst some of the people in charge of government. And so the church doesn't know what to do with him. They really want to ban him, declare him a heretic. My screen here is really messing up on me, but they really want to declare him a heretic, but they just don't know how to go about that without causing so much dissension in the church itself. So they don't call him a heretic, not during his life anyway, but they do later on. So he's going to die from a stroke in December, the very last day of the year, 1384. He's going to die from a stroke, and the room is going to be full of people. All kinds of people come to see him die. The majority of people in the room are his enemies, and really, what most people think, based on some writings and just the general consensus of the time, most people think that the people that were there to see him die were hoping he would recant some of his teachings or recant his ideas about the church, and that would kind of calm down these tensions, but that doesn't happen. He doesn't do it. Realistically, he doesn't do any of the sort because he can't do that anyway. I don't know what this is acting funny, but he can't do that anyway. He can't speak. He had a stroke 2 days prior to that. He's in church and he falls down weak and has a stroke. So if they were looking for him to do anything or say anything, it wasn't going to happen that day because he simply could not talk. The Archbishop Rundell really can't stand this guy. He really can't stand the idea of what was started with him, and he is going to write this letter to Pope John the 23rd in 1411, and this is where John Wycliffe is going to be declared a heretic. He says, "This pestilent and wretched John Wycliffe of cursed memory, the son of the old serpent, endeavored by every means to attack the very faith and sacred doctrine of the Holy Church, devising to fill up the measure of his malice, the expedient of a new translation of the scriptures into the mother tongue. This guy has all this hatred and writes this, declares a dead man a heretic over the Bible being translated into English. It's kind of crazy to me. Um, it's hard to believe. We say this all the time, even about the believers in the Bible that do some of the craziest stuff. How could they ever do that? But you get caught up in your own theologies and your own ideas of what's right. And I'm not justifying this by any means. It still baffles me that he would do this. Not only that, so he's going to write this to Pope John. The Pope is going to basically respond and declare him a heretic and say that his body should be exhumed, burned up, and taken away from any hallowed ground. And that's exactly what they do. Was that 17 years later? They're going to dig his bones up. They're going to burn his bones into ashes, and they're going to spread his ashes over the River Swift. So they did just that. Let's say prior to the 13th century, with different translations, who was peer checking before print? You don't really have a lot of peer checking before print, especially prior to 13. You don't have any print anyway, really. But like here, we're talking about Wycliffe's Bible. This is before the printing press, right? We kind of went back in time again after we talked about what led to the Greek versions being compiled. We kind of went back in time a little bit, talking about the English translations, English versions. So this Wycliffe Bible is actually being hand copied, kind of like what we were talking about with the Hebrew text. But you don't have like peer review of this stuff really, because there's very few scholars that even have the ability to do so, and even fewer scholars that are willing to risk being deemed a heretic and your bones being burnt and spread over the river. So you don't have a lot of that going on later on. So to kind of to your question, later on as these translations progress, you see the whole point of new translations is twofold. So the first reason is updating the language, because just like modern English back then was changing year by year. English language changed, and so they saw a necessity to update the English translations later on, to update the English translations into more modern English. That's somewhat the case with us up until the mid 20th century. From the mid 20th century to now, English language hasn't really changed that much, but our scholarship has. That's kind of jumping ahead. But in this time period, as we move forward, you'll see that they're going to correct some of these old translations as they go, because of like what your question asked there, Johnny. That's a great question. Because of like the context of that question, there is no peer review. So they're needing to do two things: update the English language and really update the scholarship of the translation. They're very limited by manuscripts. They're limited by, all those types of things. So it's a great question, but that kind of takes care of itself as the translations move forward from this period. But Wycliffe was just lucky enough to, live long enough and not be persecuted based on his popularity to even get this English Bible out. So here, and this is kind of the format we'll go, at least for a little while, the rest of tonight, talking about these translations, kind of giving some background, and then talking about the translation itself. So he's translating straight from the Latin Vulgate. He's going from Latin to English. That plays a role in a lot of things. When we talk about words, especially names, when we talk about names and how names are translated, early English translations are going from the Latin Vulgate to English. Later English translations are going from the Greek manuscripts to English. And there's a difference when you do that. There's a difference in things that happen when you do that. So, but he's translating from the Latin Vulgate. He's going straight from that to English. He's not using Greek manuscripts. We pay attention to the dates here, 1300s. We're not yet to the time of the Greek explosion of Greek New Testaments and stuff like that happening, and translating straight from the Hebrew and the Greek. So, but this is good. He's getting the Bible into English language. So he's using Middle English. This is Middle English. This is kind of like Shakespearean, I think, is Middle English. You and I could read it. We got some down at the bottom down here. I thought it'd be neat to include it. I should have included the Lord's Prayer, but you can do some of your own research. We don't have the time, but look up the Lord's Prayer. We have it here tonight. We'll kind of read it in a second, but look it up through the English translations that we go through tonight, and you'll see as the English changes, the need for the change of translation. So his first version was so wooden, it often lost meaning. What I mean by that, he was trying to do such a justice to the Bible they had, the Latin Vulgate. He didn't want to mess anything up. So he was going word for word. And we used this word wooden a couple of weeks ago. I think I explained that to you. That's word for word. It doesn't flow in the English of its time because it's word for word. Even that, if you go completely word for word, it won't make sense. And it lost meaning in many passages, his first edition. The edition that comes later, well, we'll talk about that in a second, but the Old Testament was probably, well, we know that it was worked on by Nicholas, his friend Nicholas of Hereford. But we know that the majority was worked on by him. There were 5 translators that we can tell worked on his Old Testament, but you have this phrase in there that comes at the end of a certain passage that says, "Here ends the translation of Nicholas of Hereford." Hereford should sound familiar to people like Tommy Kuntz that deal with cattle, but here ends the translation of Nicholas of Hereford. So we know that he did a vast majority of the Old Testament work, even though other scholars were working on it as well. In 1388, and if you pay attention to his death date there, this is after the death of Wycliffe. John Purvey, he was a friend of Wycliffe, he's going to update his version. And really what he's doing there, he's updating because of this wooden translation. He's going to update it to include English idioms. He's going to bring it to a vernacular that the average English reader or listener, most important listener, could understand. So he understood what Wycliffe was doing, but he also understood that there was a need for this updating in English. This would be the predominant translation up until Tyndale, almost 200. I said 200 years later. It's like 160 years later, something like that. But here is Wycliffe's version of the Lord's Prayer. So, Our Father that art in heavens, hallowed be thy name, THI, thy kingdom come to, be thy will done in earth as in heaven. Give to us this day our bread over other substance, and forgive to us our debts. So here's an example that I think we're talking about a wooden translation. I think this debtors and debtors was coming strictly from the Latin right there. That kind of gives you where I don't think I think it's almost like a transliteration there. But as we forgiven our debtors, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. So that right there, I mean, we can make sense of what's being said, but take that from then to now, and we understand the reason for multiple translations to continue throughout time. When you talk about his translation, the hierarchy of the church condemned there's a facsimile of his translation there. They condemned it very strongly, to the point they put Purvey and Hereford in prison, and they would actually burn all of his friends, all of their friends. Purvey and Hereford are in prison. They eventually get burned at the stake, and all of their friends with them, and they tie the Wycliffe Bible around their necks as they burn them. The 1408 synod, there's a synod. We talked about synods a while back. A synod is like a local community meeting of leaders as opposed to a very large region, but they forbade the reading of the Wycliffe Bible. At the risk of losing, and this is a quote here, at the risk of losing land, cattle, life, and goods. So they said, if you get caught reading this Bible, we can take any of these things away from you, land, cattle, life, or goods. But it actually has the opposite effect. I mean, humans are humans, people are people. People don't change, only technology changes, right? This has the opposite effect. It actually encourages more and more reading and passing around of this Bible, because it was forbidden. It was we do the same thing today. You're told not to do something, you want to see why, and you got to do it. But um, so this comes out that this risk happens, and instead of people not reading it, they actually pay. There was a a thing at the time that if you could rent this Bible to read it for 1 hour a day, it would cost you a load of hay every day. So you could bring a, it cost a load of hay for an hour a day, is kind of what was going on. So people were paying to be able to spend time reading Wycliffe's version, which is just pretty awesome to me. I think that's great. Not only that, it promoted this literacy boom that happens at the time, because people, they knew English, they heard English, they could speak English. There was not a literacy to read English or write English. And so there's this huge boom of literacy that happens because of this translation. People are wanting to read it for themselves. They're excited to be able to read and not rely on someone else to tell them not only what it says, having to hear it in Latin, which most commoners had no clue what was being said, but then being told what it means by someone else without even hearing its actual words in their own language. So there's this huge boom that happens to try to bring it to full circle in its heyday. Now, this is tradition. We have no real evidence of this, but it was said that when the first Elizabeth came, Elizabeth I became Queen of England, she was given a gift on that day of a Bible, and it was said that it was a Wycliffe Bible. Now, Elizabeth I is going to be kind of a champion of English versions and opening that up. So, but it kind of, if that's true, and that was in 1588, if that's true, which history seems to think that's true, then what a great day for this version of the Bible to kind of come full circle from being cast off as a heresy amongst the not just the clergymen of its time, but the royalty of England at its time as well, to being a gift to Queen Elizabeth the First. So after that, we have the Tyndale Bible. So again, you see these different completion dates of the New Testament first, then the Old Testament, 1526. So about 150 years. At this time, common believers were becoming more and more dissatisfied with the church, and rightfully so. They are understanding that a lot of what they're reading and hearing through, the Wycliffe Bible, it's been around for 150 years, and even when they were confiscated, you kind of have some book burnings going on. The word's out, the trick is up, and they're starting to see some of the things that they're witnessing in their churches are not what can be found within the Bible itself. This is the time where indulgences are being sold, and so that's just kind of one of those things that, like, wait a second here, this is not. We see nothing of this sort. But here's a little bit about William Tyndale. There's his lifetime, 1494 to 1536. He graduates Oxford University at the age of 16. He gets his master's degree in 1515. He teaches for 1 year at Oxford and then leaves and goes to Cambridge. He doesn't stay at Cambridge long. He's going to leave and become basically a private tutor for Sir John Walsh in 1532. What this does, his responsibilities to Sir John Walsh is not very expansive or extensive, and it gives him plenty of time to study. He's able to read, learn languages more and more, become more proficient in different languages. He's able to study the word itself and kind of measure doctrine and theology. And then here in 1522, Um, this is where I think I messed up. That's 1522. He goes to Sir John Walsh, not 1532. Um, in 1522, he's at Sir John Walsh. And then at that time, that same year, Martin Luther, this is kind of what I was talking about earlier. Martin Luther is going to release his German translation in that same year. And, in Europe, you didn't have as much of, it wasn't as cutthroat as England was when it came to translations. But he releases his translation in 1522. Now, nobody uh, or Tyndale himself never writes or speaks of like this being a motivating factor, but it's kind of understood that his years of being able to study extensively, or his year there with Sir John Walsh of being able to study extensively in conjunction with this great release of the German translation, kind of motivated Tyndale to say, maybe we should have a translation in English. So the next year he's going to go to Cuthbert Tunstall. He's in the clergy there high up, and he's gonna ask him about trying to get authorized, because now in England you had to get clearance to do any type of work with the Bible. So there was reason to think for him to think at the time that Tunstall would actually be open to this idea. He was kind of progressive in his thought process, but when he gets there, he finds that he has no interest at all. He says basically, I don't have any interest, and he tells him, I don't have any room for you at my uh, housing or palace or whatever it was. He says, not only am I not interested, I don't have any room for you to come and do any kind of work here. This is in London. So um, Tyndale rents some space from, I forgot his name, but he rents some space there in London and says, well, I'll just do my own work on the translation here. So he works a little bit of time, a couple of years on translating into English, but he quickly realizes it's not safe. Like if you're in London doing some translational work, people are going to, talk, and you're going to be found out. And he realized, like, not only is there no interest, it's not safe for me to be here doing this. So at the time you had some places that were kind of free regions. Hamburg was one of them. So he kind of leaves London, goes to Hamburg, where he can peacefully work on this translation. He spends a couple years there, but most people think that he was based out of Hamburg, but they believe that he was in Wittenberg most of the time, listening to Martin Luther speaks as at his speeches and stuff like that. Um, so from there, he's gonna from Hamburg anyway. He's gonna release his first edition of the New Testament in 1526. And if you saw, I mean, there's so many more details here that I'm leaving out, but you could go back and watch that movie that I posted, the movie that's free on YouTube. I posted the link early in the class. He's going to have some trouble printing this stuff, and people are trying to mess him up and get him not to print, and they end up smuggling copies into England. Tunstall himself opposes it harshly, basically says this is nothing but Lutheran garbage. But the commoners obviously love it. They bought up, Tunstall himself bought up as many copies as possible. So he was sending like multiple people out. He sends this one guy out and he says, I want you to buy every copy you have. You have unlimited funds. But what this does is it actually funds Tyndale's second edition. It funds the work to be done on the second edition. So it kind of had the opposite effect. I guess if he could have stolen them and not paid for them, but they were actually going out paying for these translations. So it did the opposite. So Charles V. Now this is the emperor we were talking about. That the polyglot was kind of created in honor of his birth. He considers Tyndale a very much a heretic. Tyndale's in Antwerp. Again, this is a free place, not under control of Rome or England and all this stuff. He can kind of do some work in Antwerp. Charles V sends somebody in and basically kidnaps him, drags him out of Antwerp, where he can be then placed under arrest, and once he's out of Antwerp and into Roman territory, and he puts him in prison. King Henry VIII, he's not really King Henry VIII is not a friend of Tyndale at this time, but he kind of intervenes and tries to say, "Hey, look, can we get him released from prison?" They really wanted him back in England to stop and kind of squelch what he was doing, but it kind of goes. It's not fruitful, mainly because King Henry VIII had just divorced Charles V's aunt, and so what Charles V wasn't trying to do him any favors. So just to show, the dedication Tyndale had from prison, he requested a Hebrew Bible be sent to him so he could continue his work, and he dies in October 6th of 1536, and his dying words were, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." I get chill bumps when I read that, kind of choked up a little bit because, man, it's just so awesome to see like the prayer of someone who's um, being killed for his work of God is to open the eyes of the one that oppressed him and his work. And he didn't get to see, not in that time anyway. The very next year, Henry VIII would, through around, we'll talk about it in a minute, but through the events there in England, authorizes a printing of a Bible that's largely William Tyndale's version. So his prayer was answered. I think that's just really neat. So when we talk about the translation of Tyndale's Bible and compare it to Wycliffe, I mean, that's the only two really English translations we have at the time. Wycliffe is using the Latin Vulgate and translating that into English. Tyndale's going back to the original Hebrew and Greek, and he's translating from there. Wycliffe was hand copied, like we said a while ago. Tyndale's is being printed. Wycliffe is in Middle English. Tyndale's in Modern English. It's not Modern English to us today, but it's considered in the realm of Modern English. Tyndale had, a pretty good bit. I had vast marginal notes there, and I erased that because not every version included a lot of these marginal notes, but he had a good bit of marginal notes in his first edition there. Tyndale never finished the entire Bible though, so he translated the New Testament, and then he goes back to the Old Testament afterwards, and the portions that he released there in that got released in 1534. Excuse me. They were the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books, the book of Jonah, and then I say maybe Joshua to Second Chronicles, because we're not exactly sure how much of that work he did himself. And then later on, other translations are going to use his work, and they translate up to Second Chronicles, claiming to be translating some of his work. So that's where we get that idea from. But when it came to the Old Testament, he included, these are just some funny things here. When it came to the fall of man, he included some like truly British or English sayings. He had the serpent saying, "Tush, ye shall not die." It's kind of like, yeah, right. Like, no way, you're not going to die. When it came to Pharaoh being swallowed up in the Nile, or crossing the Red Sea and being swallowed up there, it said that Pharaoh and his jolly captains got swallowed by the water. And then when it came to Aaron's calf here, this is in the translation, this is one of his notes. And, part of why, people were against his thing here, he said, "The Pope's bull slayeth more than Aaron's calf." So just some interesting stuff from there. So the second edition was printed in 1534. There was like a social climate here that led to this. There were people taking his versions, changing them up because the language was changing that much at the time. The English language was quickly changing, and people were taking his first edition and updating it and reprinting it as if it was his original edition. So he said, "Hang on, wait a minute. Let me go ahead and update my edition." So he kind of does that in 1534. these are the three main things that his translation was known for, and you can see how um, his contention with the church at the time and stuff like that played into how he translated these words. Now, I personally would say that these words that he translated were accurate. Beforehand, they had this idea of, so he used for the word church, instead of using church, he used congregation. Um, Now, this is in light of the Roman Catholic Church and its power. So, this is playing a role into that. He used elders instead of priests, and he used love instead of charity. They were using this idea of charity, of giving all your money to the Roman Catholic Church. So, these are the three main, kind of words of contention. What the hierarchy of the church at that time had issues with. These were the three main ones. There's definitely more than that, but those are the three main ones. Um, so we talked about the version that would be uh, authorized by Henry VIII the very next year, and this is it, the Coverdale Bible. So we all, I don't want to assume, but most people that study history a little bit understand Henry VIII. He wanted to have the male successor, so he's married to Catherine of Aragon, and he wants to divorce her because he has all these daughters, and he requests nullification from the Pope, saying, "Hey, please nullify my marriage. She's not giving me a son, basically, and I need a son." And so he was rejected, and so he severed England from Rome and from the Roman Catholic Church. And at the suggestion of one of his close advisors, he creates the Church of England. So when he does this, the Roman Catholic Church is what's really influencing a lot of this translational contention. And so when he does this, he actually opens up and he says, you know what, we're going to now have an English version that we'll authorize. So you have this guy, Miles Coverdale. That's his life period there. He's going to do some great work. He actually works on three of the very influential versions of the English Bible here, Coverdale Bible here after his namesake. He's going to basically do the entire work on the Great Bible that comes afterwards, and then Geneva Bible, which a lot of people know of. So he was an Augustinian friar from York, England. He was Reformed. He was part of the Reform movement, and he's going to end up in Cambridge. In 1528, he flees England, and he works with he flees England based on he's running from King Henry VIII actually, and because of the work that he was doing that Henry VIII was actually against. He works with Tyndale. When Tyndale starts his work on the Old Testament, he works with him there. Now, Coverdale is not the scholar that Tyndale is, but he's learning a lot from him, and he starts to work with him on the Torah, and then all this stuff happens with the Tyndale. But when it comes to the translation, so Coverdale's going to work on this translation in exile. He's not, like I said, he's not the scholar that Tyndale is. So he's actually using 5 other translations. When I say he's not the scholar when it comes to Greek and Hebrew that Tyndale was. So he's going to use Tyndale's work. He's going to use Martin Luther's German work. He's going to use the Latin Vulgate, a different Latin version, and I can't remember the 5th translation he uses, but he's going to refer to all of these and kind of help mold his version here. But like by and large, he's basically updating Tyndale's version, and that's going to be the majority of it. When it comes to the Old Testament, he follows Tyndale to a T until he could not, till Tyndale's ends there in Second Chronicles. But when he finishes this translation, he sees the political climate changing in England, and he's going to dedicate this Bible to King Henry VIII. And King Henry VIII takes this Bible and he brings it to his counselors, and he says, "I want you to look through this Bible. This thing here is created by someone that I, kind of had a bounty out for, and he has dedicated it to me. So I want you to check it out and see." And they come back to King Henry VIII, and he says, "No, this is horrible work. This is not, no way we should ever dedicate or allow this or authorize this Bible in England." And he says simply, "All right, well, show me one heresy within his translation." and there were none. They could not show Henry VIII any heresies, and he says uh, this will be the authorized version to be used in England. So, like I said, this is basically Tyndale's version edited in light of other languages. He's going to take Tyndale's version, take what he knows about German and Latin, and kind of update some things and use those other ones to help him translate the Old Testament portions that Tyndale couldn't do. So, after this, really, I'm not doing justice here, but we've got to move along. The Matthew Bible in 1537 was produced, and the Matthew Bible is just updating Tyndale's version again. Um, it became pretty popular. It was allowed to be read. No, it was not allowed to be read. That's the next one, the Great Bible. But Matthew's Bible gains popularity amongst English readers. And Edward Fox, who was a known theologian of the time, very popular theologian, he says basically he came out against the Matthew Bible because this Bible was written in such a common vernacular, everybody could understand it. And he said basically the commoners have become more knowledgeable of the scriptures than the professional theologians. And that was a bad thing in his mind. So that shows the influence of the Matthew Bible there. And again, Matthew Bible is just updating the Tyndale as well, along with the Coverdale. Now, the Great Bible is going to be authorized, and basically, again, we're just updating, and this is the language is going quickly. Coverdale is going to be asked to do the Great Bible. It's called the Great Bible based on the size of its pages. It's very, very large. He's basically asked to sit down and do a more thorough work in the translation from the original languages. So he's going to do a more thorough work. It's going to be translated. Now, this is going to be the first Bible that's authorized for public uses in churches when it comes to the English Bible. So the Coverdale Bible was allowed and authorized to be printed, and it was basically being used amongst scholarship. This great Bible is the first English Bible to be passed out to all churches in England, and every church had the Great Bible. So it's being read in their language, and it's authorized from there. We've got a few minutes here. We get to the Geneva Bible now in 1560, and probably everybody in this class has heard of the Geneva Bible. It's known as being the Puritans' Bible, but the political and religious climate leading up to here, and I'm not doing justice to the history, but again, we've got to keep moving, is a roller coaster. 1543, King Henry VIII kind of reverses his this idea on what you have going on is a rejection of Protestantism that comes into England. It's not necessarily wanting England, the Church of England, to return to the Roman Catholic Church, but to return to Roman Catholic doctrine. And so there's this pushback against Protestantism at this time. And so King Henry VIII goes back and bans any reading of the Tyndale Bible, any reading of the Coverdale Bible. And so you kind of have this flip-flop happening. I have, there's a new ban there in 1543. The Parliament comes in and Parliament issues a ban on all these translations. And King Henry VIII kind of backs them, whether it's for political pressure or what, he backs them nonetheless. So right there on the next block, that should say Henry VIII, not Henry VII. But so you're going to go from Henry VIII issuing a new ban on basically every English translation. Edward VI is going to be his predecessor. Edward's going to reverse that, and he's going to say, yes, we can have English translations, bring them all back. You have mass printing of all of these older English Bibles. Queen Mary, who is known for being a vicious ruler, she's going to come back and say, absolutely not. You can't have English Bibles. And you have these mass Bible burnings going on in the front of churches and all that stuff. And then her successor is Queen Elizabeth I. And this is who we were talking about earlier, who was gifted a Bible. But she's going to open the gates again and say, absolutely all English translations are good to go. But during all this stuff, especially back in Mary's time, you see Protestants flee England. They're going to flee. And so you have uh, a little group of Protestants that flees to Geneva. Now, this is the home of Calvin, John Calvin, and Beza. They're going to flee to Geneva, and they're going to do some work there. But we have this guy, William Whittington. He is the brother-in-law to John Calvin's wife. He was earlier an instructor at All Souls College in Oxford. Very very studied scholar, but he was one of these few fugitives that end up in Geneva. While he's in Geneva, he starts work on a translation. He's gonna in 1557, he's gonna have an English New Testament, and then he's gonna take the help from others there in Geneva to help with the Old Testament and really kind of push forward with this. I mean, translational work is not an easy task now, nor was it then. It was more labor intensive then to push these things out. So he solicits the help from friends there in Geneva. They complete the whole Bible, and this is the Geneva Bible that we know is completed in 1560, and it was dedicated to Queen Elizabeth I. What's interesting about the climate at that time, it's 9 o'clock. We'll wrap up here shortly, but what's interesting to the climate at that time was this happens right as Scotland really shakes off the Roman Catholic Church as well. So Scotland's going to, right here within a year of this completion of this Bible, they're going to do the same thing that England did back with Henry VIII, although this is for principles and not for the sake of divorcing someone and being respected there by the church. But they're going to shake off the Roman Catholic Church on principles. And they put out this instruction that every household in Scotland should buy a Geneva Bible if they could afford it. So you have this huge mass buying up of this Bible, this translation that comes out, and it really just solidifies the Geneva Bible in history, in the social climate at that time. The reason most people have heard of the Geneva Bible is because of Scotland at the time and their this instruction to buy it. But what's really cool is what molds this Protestant revolution in Scotland at the time. I say Protestant for lack of a better word, but this shaking off of the Roman Catholic Church in Scotland at the time, they still didn't really have English Bibles. They were still being read in Latin. So the very first thing that these believers get in the form of an English Bible that really molds their theological climate is the Geneva Bible, which is not just a Bible. It has tons of footnotes. So when we talk about, hang on, let's see. Incredible to think how much happened in just the past 500 years. Seemed to escalate very quick. Yes, everything did seem to escalate very, very quickly. We've got just this slide, the next one, so we'll push through this for next week. But when it comes to the translation of the Geneva Bible, the Old Testament, they're basically revising the Great Bible. They are pulling from the Greek text, and they're just revising it. They're especially taking a look at those books because the Great Bible is updating the Tyndale as well. And those books that Tyndale did not translate, remember his predecessor pulls from other languages. So here they're going back in the Old Testament to the original Hebrew for all those books that he didn't, to say, let's translate straight from the Hebrew into English. So this is the first version of the English Bible that translates 100% of the Old Testament from Hebrew into English. So just a neat little thing there. I mean, the New Testament was definitely 100% from the Greek text into English before this, but this here in 1560, first translation straight from the Hebrew to English in the Old Testament. The New Testament is mostly Matthew's revision. So the Matthew Bible is mostly the Matthew revisions to the Tyndale with some changes. So they're in Geneva here, so they take some changes from the Great Bible, but they also take some changes from Beza's Latin version of the New Testament. The Geneva Bible is mostly known for its marginal notes. They were clearly Calvinistic. This is what's going to anger King James I. They were clearly Calvinistic in their nature. I mean, we can't hide from that. That's their influence. They're in Geneva. They had many anti-Roman sentiments. So They're not just making English royalty mad. They're making the Roman Catholic Church mad. Uh, in Revelation, the pit, the beast that comes from the pit, is identified in the marginal notes as the Pope himself. So that's not just a new idea for all of you that follow some of these uh, conspiracies about the Book of Revelation and our modern climate and the Pope being the beast and all that stuff. That was an idea back in 1560. The problem with this translation, it was a very, very good translation. Again, the Old Testament couldn't be touched in English because it's the first one straight from Hebrew. The New Testament had been updated, like I said, but going back to Johnny's question, you didn't have a lot of peer review, but these things get peer reviewed through the translations that come afterwards. So um, this right here is a phenomenal translation, the best of its time thus far, without a doubt. So it couldn't be ignored, but the clergy couldn't support it either because of its marginal notes and all that stuff. So this is what influenced British Puritanism, the Pilgrims. This was kind of at least for the first ones to head over to the New World. This was kind of their Bible when they're fleeing. Uh, the Puritans are fleeing the Church of England. This was their Bible. The Apocrypha, I didn't put this in the previous translations, but all the translations up to now, when they include the Apocrypha, it's completely separated from the rest of the Old Testament. So it's got its own section. Again, we can go back to our slides from a couple weeks ago. They're not, these Protestant Bibles are not including the Apocrypha as part of any sacred text. They're including them for reading purposes only, the lack of access to them and stuff like that. But they clearly said that they were not scripture. It was popular in England. This version was, but never appointed. So the clergy knew it was a great translation. There's never really any book burning of this. Not to say later on it didn't influence a lot of stuff, but it's not like banned. This version isn't banned because it was a great version. Matthew Parker, who takes on the next translation, actually acknowledges how great of a translation this is and uses it to help with his competitive translation at the same time, but it's never appointed and basically authorized for use. Now, this is the last one we'll talk about tonight, the Bishop's Bible, and this is just in reaction to the Geneva Bible. So the Bishop's Bible was the authorized Bible. They commissioned, the King of England commissions Matthew Parker to come up with something to replace the Great Bible. English is progressing fast. You're talking about from the 1530s to the 1560s. Just one generation, the English has changed so much. They need to update the Great Bible, but they need to replace it with something other than the Geneva. So the bishops weren't willing to take on this Geneva Bible that had all these theological and political notes in it. But Matthew Parker was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He definitely saw a need for a new translation, so he kind of takes on this work, and he invites the bishops of England to help him in this work. This is going to solidify that it would be an authorized Bible, right? But he takes this work on quickly. He's going to solicit all this help also because of the fast pace needed to. This is 8 years after the Geneva Bible. They need something else that they can put out that's not the Geneva Bible. So they do a quick work here. The translators that they brought in, they're not the best scholars. They require a lot of oversight. So it took a lot of time and effort from Matthew Parker to push them forward. But the Queen does authorize this version as the version of England. It does make its way and being read in the churches. With the translation, it follows the Geneva and some of its Old Testament parts. It does have marginal notes. The marginal notes were markedly tame. They were a compromise to make sure that they had an updated English version, but it was a safe but dignified. This is how most people would say it was a safe but dignified update to the translation. They're not going to get into really. Matthew Parker's business is not to compete against the Geneva Bible in its vernacular, political and theological vernacular in the notes. He's trying to update a version. The people need something that the Queen would authorize and allow to be read in the churches. The churches are still reading the Great Bible. It's like us trying to read something from the Civil War, a Bible from the Civil War, or something like that. The English is totally different. So he needs something. So he just wants to get something out there. So he makes this a very safe translation. It's not popular though, and in terms of editions, it has 20 editions as it's being updated versus the Geneva has 120 versions. And really, what we see here is you kind of have two versions going forth: the Anglican versions, where it's authorized by England, and the Geneva versions going forward. And then you're going to come into this, the Catholic versions really start from here. I left one out from this week's lesson, which we don't have time. I'm 10 minutes over. But I left one out this week as well. We'll catch up with it right before we start with the King James Version next week. But there's the, I had it written down, I can't remember how to say it, the Douay-Rheims Bible, Douay-Rheims. But it's the Catholic version that comes out at the same time. It's 1582. So the Catholics, you're going to start having multiple translations from multiple regions and multiple theological persuasions too, for those purposes. So anybody have any questions? There weren't a lot of questions in the chat group. If anybody's got any, you can unmute and ask your questions, or you can send them to me directly. All right. Well, sorry we're pushing through this information. Some of these things, like these versions tonight that we went through, very important to understand these versions as we go forward, and you kind of really see what went into the English Bible you have today. So next week we'll finish up with, we'll do the Douay-Rheims version, and then go straight into the King James. Obviously, we're going to spend a little bit of time on the King James, and then get into our modern translation. I'll probably skip. I'll do the King James and just really kind of skip over and just lightly tap each little translation from then up until the 20th century. And then we'll go the 20th century forward, which includes most of the translations, the New American Standard, and all of the translations that are built into these ones we have today, and really give you something to take away with. So sorry we're having to push through it, and sorry we're having to push through to an extra week. But appreciate everybody being here. Hope you have a blessed week, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks.